This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. Why do so many startups fail? Why do entrepreneurs fail? My guest today has some great insights. Gabriel Weinberg. Today we are discussing his philosophy and his book title of the same name, Traction. Gabriel is the founder and CEO of DuckDuckGo, an alternative search engine. Yeah, that sounds pretty crazy in today's age to compete with Google, but Gabriel has a great story. It is for every entrepreneur, the would-be entrepreneur or the already established entrepreneur. This conversation will get you thinking about so many different issues. Now, in the beginning, I must say, there is one aspect where you might say to yourself, I don't know what these two guys are talking about. They're talking about 19 principles. These 19 principles, these 19 issues are paramount to Gabriel's traction philosophy. We can only discuss a few of them in the podcast, but I think you'll get the point. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Gabriel Weinberg. I love this word, traction. I want to know from you the first time you used it in a business context. What was the aha moment? Did someone push you? Did you hear it somewhere? How did you connect the dots with this word traction?
I have no idea. I've been doing internet startups since 2000. Somehow it kind of creeped into the nomenclature over the time and became a central part of what I believed in, but I have no idea where it started.
It's a great word, though. If you think about it, it's like, you get a grip and something starts to pull you, and it can pull you farther along. And it's about this gripping and holding on. It's almost like Velcro in a way, but it's about moving forward too. It's a great word.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, it succinctly describes, I think, the definition of what every startup is. A startup is defined by growth, and growth is traction.
But it does it in a nuanced way, because you can say that, but traction is something different.
Exactly. It's such a deep subject. So when you get into it a little deeper, you see that traction is really quantitative evidence of customer demand, meaning that you can actually put numbers to your core metrics and customer engagement and see those things growing up.
I mean, this is the number one challenge that everyone faces. I've had an online business online since 1996. I know I did not think about the concept of traction at the time. I just looked at business, sales, profits, and customers coming in and that kind of growth. But I didn't bother to be scientific about it, probably to my detriment, even though I've done very well. But the scientific aspect really strikes me to really dig down deeper.
Yeah, me too. I didn't do it either for probably the first half of my career. But then when you start doing it, you realize the only way to prove that you're really sustainably growing is by really digging into those numbers.
Well, that's an interesting way to say it. To prove sustainably growing, I guess there's two different types of proof. There's the proof to yourself, if you have no desire to sell your business and you're making a lot of money, and there's the proof to somebody that might want to acquire your business. Two different types of proof, huh?
That is definitely true. As someone who's gone through an acquisition and been involved in others, the latter involves a lot of spreadsheets. But you should also prove to yourself, which can be more casual, clearly. I think it's equally important to really understand. As an example, one mistake that I made starting out was in my last business and in this one, when I started out, I didn't set an explicit traction goal, a hard number that would really make an inflection point in the business. And if you don't do that, you can't really measure your marketing efforts against anything useful, so that you might actually do marketing efforts that don't move the needle for you.
Why don't we dig apart some of the details in your new work? One of the things that struck me is when I first started going through the work, I was thinking, okay, this is just, my first, even before I was reading the book, I was like just kind of casually thumbing through. And I thought, well, okay, there's just some typical ways to think about distribution. But it's different than that. And I thought, and I would love for you to elaborate on this, I thought one of the points that was really nice that you quoted Peter Thiel on was the notion that distribution doesn't have to be all 19 types that you mention in your work. It could be one great form. And why don't you talk about the perhaps any psychological or to their detriment, people that perhaps fixate on all 19, whereas they might have one great one and they end up spending a lot of time and a lot of money on the others that are perhaps dead end and not really focusing on the one that's brought them to the game.
Yeah, we found two kind of non-intuitive things in all this traction research. One, what you're hitting on is in any major kind of growth explosion for a company, there's usually just one marketing channel that's dominating. And that's what Peter Thiel, founder of PayPal and billionaire, pointed out. And the second is, often that channel is an underutilized one. So it's often not the one that you would think of initially. What we set out to do is, and basically replicating what we saw successful founders do, is make a nice little framework to help you go through all those 19 channels and zoom in on the one that seems like it's going to get you to your goal right now, and then just focus on that one.
Let me get you to add some color. So you mentioned some startups, some successful startups, some acquisitions. You built an alternative search engine. I would love for you to go ahead and spend a few minutes and talk about the idea of building an alternative search engine. I can remember back in the day before Google, you had InfoSeek, Alta Vista, Excite, Lycos, Yahoo, and then Google killed everybody and won the game. And here you are all these years later, literally, a decade perhaps after Google's dominance, and you're sitting back and you're saying, hey, I think we need another search engine.
Yeah, pretty much. So I've been at this latest startup for a while now. I started working on it at the end of 2007. And like you mentioned, it's a search engine that you can switch to. It's like Google, except that we don't track you. So when you search on DuckDuckGo, you're anonymous. And then in addition, we focus on some other things we think Google can't do that easily, which is have a much less cluttered design because they're kind of pushing their own properties inside their search results like Google+. And also we focus on instant answers above the results in an open way. So we'll partner with sites like Yelp and IMDb and showcase their answers as opposed to what Google does with Google Places, some of their own stuff. In terms of traction, it is difficult, I think what you're alluding to, to start a search engine and go up against, one of the dominant tech companies in the world. I struggled with it initially, and that's actually what prompted me to go and research and write this book, is figuring out a framework to really get traction for DuckDuckGo. And I made some mistakes early on, one that I alluded to, but then eventually hit upon this framework and have used it repeatedly to find a channel to grow. And we started out around 10,000 searches a month, and now we're at about 300 million. And each one of those orders of magnitude, so from 10,000 to 100,000, 100,000 to a million, what we were doing for marketing stopped working, and we had to change it. And we basically ran through these 19 channels again, running tests, and figured out one that would get us to the next level. And quite honestly, we're there right now.
Are you open to talking about the one that we're going to break this apart and go into some deeper so people don't feel like they're kind of coming in the middle of a conversation. But was there a channel that you figured out for your alternative search engine that worked best or is working right now best?
So we've actually gone through this cycle 6 times. So I started out using SEO, believe it or not. That was a mistake. Happy to dig into that in a minute. And then we moved to content marketing, both kind of my blog and then microsites to educate people about search privacy. Then we moved to PR, publicity, first online, then print, then TV, in kind of 3 different waves. The last one when the Snowden revelations were revealed. And then this last phase, we've been doing business development, which is partnering with other companies, and most notably, Apple included DuckDuckGo as part of the iPhone you can switch search engines as a default option, and so did Mozilla Firefox, and that was last year. That brought us to today, and we're essentially rerunning these experiments right now, and we don't know the next phase, which channel we're going to do to get the next 10 million people on DuckDuckGo, and we're literally running these experiments as we speak.
In hindsight, somebody sits back and they hear, okay, here are these major players in the browsing wars and competitors, and you have Mozilla and you have Apple, you have Google, and clearly Apple and Mozilla probably they don't want to have all their browsing go through a Google product. That wasn't your idea in the beginning, to know that to be thinking ahead that a big player like Apple would just love to have an alternative search engine. Were you thinking that early on?
Well, here's the thing: is we went through these channels. Part of the exercise is to brainstorm each one of the 19 and try to figure out, okay, in the success case, what would be the best thing here? And so many years ago, we did look at it and we said, okay, what could we do in partnerships, business development? And we said, yeah, wouldn't it be awesome if Apple included us? And we attempted to do that and reach out to them and others, for years. That's the test we ran inside business development, and it just wasn't successful until last year. And so a lot of these, channels, you end up with good ideas and you run a test, but the honest answer is most tests don't work. You got to keep coming back to them over time.
Well, you're bringing up an issue that may or may not be an aspect of your work right now, but resilience. If you're going to be an entrepreneur and you take a whack and you fail, and you take a whack and you fail, and you take a whack and you fail, and if you quit and you go home and start licking your wounds, it's all over. There's never going to be a chance to get back in the game.
Yeah, you're hitting upon the number one advice I like to give, so you're preaching the choir here, but for me to restate it, I call it the one and done mentality. If people have that mentality, like, oh, I'm going to give this thing a try, and then if it fails, I'm going to go back to my day job or whatever I was doing, that is generally not going to work out well for you, because the first try in startups usually fail, and the first try at marketing within your startup usually fails. I like to advise to treat startups in two levels. One, treat startups as a career path, so that you can, if you think about it as a career path, then you can think about building skills that you'll use over the next 2 decades. And then in a given startup, I also made this mistake. You really want to commit to only an idea that you're willing to work on for the next decade or more, because that's really the time scale of successful startups. I think people believe that a lot of these things take off and then they turn over in 3 years. That is very much the exception and not the rule.
I don't see what usefulness there is to look at the case of Mark Zuckerberg other than to applaud him and say fabulous success, fantastic movie. But I don't know what is given as many times as he's held out as to what to look up to. It's not a good objective for people. That's just not. There's no other Zuckerbergs.
Yeah, and people should know the reality when they get into entrepreneurship, which is, things usually take a long time, and it's a hard slog. At the end of it, it can be great because you're working on something that is now making money that you are passionate about. But the real problem is people often get into it with a kind of quick, a quick money making scheme almost mentality of an idea that they're not totally passionate about, and then they get into year 2 and 3 and they're like, wow, this isn't really fun. Whereas if they pick something that they were really excited about, that they really thought about they could work on for a decade, then you have a different mentality, and then you maybe you're in the trough of year 2 and 3, and you can be like, okay, I can get through this because I really like what I'm doing.
What did you do early on? I can think back to my early on situation where I convinced myself that if I was not successful with this online venture, I was a failure. And there was no going back. I created a situation that I could not go back under no circumstances, or literally not physical death, but literally I was dead intellectually. I had to. There's no other choice. That might be too strong. I'm just curious your perspective.
I had a similar story arc. I started a company right out of college, educational software. I very much did believe in the idea, but it was 15 years too early, basically. It failed. And I made a lot of other mistakes, but the idea was going to fail regardless. And it was kind of the first thing I really failed at. I did some soul searching at that moment and decided, do I really want to pursue this? And this is probably going to be more of a reality, or do I want to do something, that's easier? And I decided I wanted that challenge. So after that moment, something kind of switched for me where it was okay to fail. Luckily, that happened to me just, a couple years into this career.
Bringing it back to traction, I love some of the phrases from the work. Traction equals customer demand. Traction trumps everything. It's a sign of a company taking off. And I wonder, too, have you experienced, if you're talking about traction to a new entrepreneur who has not experienced some aspect of traction in their life, is it difficult to get it across? Because to me, I find the notion of talking about entrepreneurism to people that perhaps want to do it that have not yet jumped can be difficult.
Yes, it definitely is. I mean, I try to focus people on the non-intuitive aspects of it. And so one non-intuitive aspect, especially when people are just getting started, is you really want to start, thinking about getting traction and marketing right from the start. And the problem is people get into a product or service because they had this product or service idea and they want to just go build it, not realizing that, what people normally build is the wrong thing for the market because it's just their one vision. What people generally do is they go get some beta customers. The problem is those people are also too close to you and are kind of framed with your previous idea and versions. And so if you think of your initial product as a leaky bucket, you pour in customers at the top and customers leak out of your bucket because your product's not good yet. You need a steady stream of cold customers with fresh eyes to tell you where those leaks are. And if you don't have that when you launch, you're still going to have leaks more of the time than not. And so it's essentially very important to start these marketing activities and thinking about channels and marketing messages and what niche you're going to go after right from the beginning. So that's one thing that new people I see really mess up.
Why don't you talk about a quote that you used from Mark Andreessen and your 50% rule, the notion of product and traction at 50% each?
Yeah, this is essentially the same key point, and that's why we hark on it so much, is that Mark Andreessen, famous venture capitalist, said that the most common reason they pass on startups that otherwise have a good product is they just don't have a distribution strategy, don't have a way that they can articulate how they're going to get customers. And that is exactly what happens to most companies, is they work on a product and the product actually might be good, and they launch and they can't get traction because they haven't really thought about how they're going to get customers yet. And then they run out of money and die, which is really sad because the product was actually good. And so what he's saying and what we're saying is start right from the beginning, spending half your time thinking about, how you're actually going to get customers when you launch, what niche you're going to focus on, what marketing message resonates, what channel out of the 19 you're going to use. The advice is to this 50% rule, spend 50% of your time right from the beginning. If you do that, at least you'll have more of a chance to survive when you launch.
Your book that's coming out now under the Portfolio Penguin imprint, this is a second edition. So you've now gone big time, and they gave a bigger advance, or but they like the success they saw last year in 2014, and I believe you moved 35,000 copies as a self-published author. That's a significant number for those out there that might not be aware. As a guy that's written some books, that's a significant number. It's definitely commendable for sure. Why don't you talk about the techniques that you used as a self-published author, the traction technique that perhaps was it one of your 19 elements that you found that worked best? Was it more than one? Why don't you talk about that process of launching a self-published book in 2014?
We used the framework from the book really to launch traction. We tried to get traction for traction, if you will. We literally did experiments. We did the brainstorming step where we brainstormed each of the 19 channels, and then we ran tests in a bunch. So we ran a bunch of things because some of the tests didn't work out as we thought they would. We ran some guest posting tests. We ran Twitter ads tests. We ran tests seeing what would happen if we ranked high on Amazon with good rankings. And then ultimately we found 2 channels that we focused on. First, podcasts, believe it or not, were the best channel. And then when we saturated that, couldn't really find any more, we focused on email marketing, where we gave people kind of a drip campaign, which means they got a series of emails to educate them about traction and then ultimately leading in a sale. I'd say that taking our own advice with the 50% rule, we started these experiments way early, and we had a lot of early reader feedback, and we'd keep bringing in readers with fresh eyes to make sure the work was resonating. And our initial traction goal was 10,000 copies. And we achieved that, again, first through podcasts and through email. And then we basically went back to our day jobs. I'm the CEO of DuckDuckGo, and my co-author, Justin, was running another company that got acquired. Then the book pretty much sold, the last 25,000 copies were selling itself based on the email marketing we set up and word of mouth. And that's kind of testament to doing the 50% rule and ending up with a product that actually really resonates, that people say has product market fit. So the book was ultimately helping people get traction, and then our marketing efforts, help get the word out about it. But you need both. You need a product that is really resonating, and then you need a distribution strategy to get that word out.
Let me ask you a side question, kind of tangential to this book process. I'm looking at some marketing right now. I see Eric Ries of the Lean Startup. I see Seth Godin, James Altucher, Fred Wilson, big VC. Were those names secured to say nice things about the work on the first edition, or now with the new edition? Or meaning, did you have that kind of marketing muscle on the first edition as well? And if so,
no.
Okay.
No, we had no. We were unknown in the kind of that realm of getting blurbs like that.
Because that's a great list. Everyone knows that's a great list. If you see that list, I think now for this newest edition, when people see that list, that's social proof off the charts, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is kind of like I was saying with DuckDuckGo, where you go in these rounds of, things that worked initially didn't work later. You were asking about Apple. We couldn't have done Apple before we had gotten bigger. We couldn't have gotten all those names for the book before we had gotten some traction for the book. But once we got sold that 35,000 copies in the self-published edition, all of a sudden, doors open, and some of the things that we thought we couldn't do initially, now we could do. And so when you run these brainstorming tests, after you get bigger and achieve your first goal, you set a new traction goal, some other inflection point in your business. Then you rerun the brainstorming and you say, okay, well, some of those things we thought of initially that we couldn't actually do because we were too small, now we might be able to do again. And so that happened here. Then we reached out to people like James Altucher and asked if they would comment on the book, and they did.
Before I dig into some more details, I noticed in your appendix significant list of prominent people across all different types of worlds and entrepreneurism that you went and sought feedback from. I've got a couple names here I would love to throw at you and let you tell the audience perhaps the most critical lesson that you learned from that individual. Yes, I'm putting you on the spot, but these are easy put you on the spot. You know all this by heart. You could not forget this. Jimmy Wales, the co-founder of Wikipedia. So you get a chance to chat with him. What did he tell you that struck you?
So we talked to him in the context of community building as one of the channels, which is a very underutilized channel because people don't think of it as a way to get traction. But if you kind of invest in a community and create a community around your product, that can be the traction in and of itself. So Wikipedia did that. Stack Exchange, which runs Stack Overflow, a number of the sites did that. Yelp had this strategy early on. And so he really gave us some insights into how you build that early community. And 2 things in particular, that stood out that we highlighted in the book was, what is somewhat unknown is he bootstrapped Wikipedia on another encyclopedia site called Newpedia. And so there was one thing of tapping into existing audiences to try to get them to come over to your new community when you start, and kind of bootstrapping the community. And the second thing he said, and basically everyone we talked about community building, is communities are very mission-driven activities, and you want to set up that mission right from the beginning. Actually, he told us a lot of cool things. A third thing, just because it's so interesting, was setting up guidelines for the community that are very strict, that are essentially writing the culture before the community gets started. And in Wikipedia's case, that was like, how articles were going to get edited and arbited. You have to do that for a community earlier on than you would for a company culture, which almost happens naturally. Anyway, he was a great interview.
Let me throw another name at you, someone that has been on my podcast, I think 3 times. I really love his way of thinking. I think he's done a fantastic job of building his career, and that's Ryan Holiday. What did Ryan throw at you? And I'm sure he did not mince any words either.
Yeah. So Ryan was helpful in a number of respects. In a more meta sense, he's a best-selling author, and so he helped give a lot of advice, just how to launch a book, what channels might work, what tests we should run, things like that. But we also interviewed him for the PR chapter, publicity chapter, because he wrote a book, Trust Me, I'm Lying, about how the media landscape has dramatically changed in the past few years. And his key insight there is that it used to be the case when, it was just the New York Times and there was a certain number of pages in the paper, that it was a privilege for them to kind of write about you. But the tables have turned with the internet, in that, something like Business Insider, Huffington Post, they essentially have infinite pages, and they're trying to get page views for their advertising. So it's really a privilege for them to write about you, and you should be, pitching stories to them directly in that context. And his other key insight was things now filter up the media chain, which means that these bigger sites, since they have so many, they can put out infinite, essentially, pages. They're constantly looking to smaller sites for stories. Those sites are still looking to even smaller ones. So if you have a really interesting story, you can actually pitch it obliquely, like not go straight to CNN, but go to the blogs or forums that CNN reads, and you can figure that out pretty easily, and then get it on there and get some press, get some buzz going on like these smaller sites, and it'll filter up to the larger ones. And there's a number of stories we highlight in the book there.
I think that anyone that's listening and paying attention realizes, and look, my world is primarily trading, and it's taking a very scientific approach to trading. But I think for those people that are listening to how you approach this, I know how Ryan approaches it, guys like Tim Ferriss, this success is engineered. This isn't just a gamble and field of dreams, build it, they will come. The engineering mindset, the scientific mindset is paramount.
Yeah, I mean, I can't echo that enough. And I think that is a key challenge for a lot of people, is to make it an engineering effort. And if anything, this is a psychological hurdle, because the frameworks are there, and some of the techniques are there, but you have to get into the mindset of, I'm going to run tests, I'm going to put numbers to things, some things are going to fail, there's a lot of uncertainty. Yeah, you have to realize that build it and they will come. It's just a complete fallacy, unfortunately.
One more name before I dig back into some of the key precepts in traction. Eric Ries, the author of The Lean Startup, a best-selling book, a kind of a movement behind it. If you want, you can elaborate a little bit about what The Lean Startup was, and perhaps talk about some of the lessons that you picked up from him.
Yeah, so Lean Startup is somewhat of an inspiration for this book. So it's a product development or customer development methodology where, when you're starting out just to build a product, to figure out exactly what features to build, you go, you quote, get out of the building and go talk to prospective customers, figure out with them if what you're thinking about building is really solving a problem. And it's called validated learning, and it's also a very scientific approach. And essentially, I went out looking in 2009 for, is there a similar approach for traction? And he was one of the first people I reached out to. to see if there was anything that translated. And I ultimately found there wasn't, and then decided to write this book. But he was very helpful in helping think about how to frame these traction concepts, because he had done so for product and customer development. In addition, we talked to him about a traction channel, the speaking engagements one, because when he launched his book, both speaking engagements and offline events, he initially got on the bestseller list in some interesting ways. He created meetup groups that happened across. First, he created a blog. That was his initial thing. But then when he had an audience, when he was going to launch, he actually created local meetup groups in all sorts of cities, and then did a broadcast across all of them where he talked about the launch and about Lean Startup. And then those meetup groups actually continued to meet and apply the techniques. And that kind of offline events strategy kept him on the bestseller list for a long time. And then, Seth Godin also did this with his Tribe book. And it's such an interesting strategy that applies beyond books. And we go through some other examples where you can host your own conference. A number of startups have done that as another great way to attract a lot of customers. But again, such an underutilized strategy.
Seth, which I love Seth's work. I love. I was reading his blog today. Just had not seen it for a couple of weeks, digging in. And I know this would probably be a light version or a streamlined version of his message. But to me, when I think of a Seth Godin, I think of build your intuitive art. I feel like Seth gives a little less engineering approach and a little bit more of hey, get off your rear end and go make something happen. There are people out there ready to take your art. Or am I missing some of that? And there's a little bit more going on behind the scenes with Seth on the engineering side.
Yeah, he focuses a lot on the psychological aspects we're talking about, of overcoming those psychological pieces, which I agree with him is probably the key barrier for a lot of people. But underneath what he actually does, what he's done with his books and what's in the long form of his books, he digs into the engineering more. And when he's done his book launches, they've been very engineered and engineered well. So for an example, he used this meetup strategy again, where he had these linchpin meetups across the world. It was such a good strategy. And then most recently, he's been kind of upending the publishing industry and, putting out free ebooks and things like that kind of, he's been testing new strategies. So that's one of the things you realize when you focus on a core channel is you're testing shifts to just testing different channels to testing strategies within that channel. If you're doing it right, you're on the cutting edge. You're testing things that no one else have tested before. And I see him doing that a lot with book publishing.
I tell people if you read the first 40 or 50 pages of Linchpin, his book, Linchpin, Seth Godin's book, and you have not got energized and you're ready to go take on and slay the dragon, or if you read those first 40 or 50 pages and you just say, that's bullshit. If you say that's just bullshit, then just go back to the cube job and just don't go there, because those first 40 or 50 pages in that book are so spot on. Hey, let me jump back to traction. So you've got something you call the bullseye framework. Why don't you explain that?
Sure. And so we've been talking about these 19 channels. And so the bullseye framework is using a metaphor of a bullseye, like you're hitting a target. And the idea is quite simple: to find that one channel in the center, the bullseye, that is really going to take you to your traction goal, which hopefully you've identified that it's 10,000 users or whatever it is. And then the framework is designed to start from that outer ring, which is all 19 channels, and help you brainstorm there, and then run tests on the middle ring on the most promising ones. And then we hope one of those tests are pretty successful and you hit the bullseye, and then you focus, you get rid of all your other efforts and you focus on that one channel that's going to get you to that goal.
I want to dig apart a couple of the 19 just to kind of get people thinking about them. And we'll just talk about two or three. I'd love to dig into all 19, but I'll have you all morning. Search engine optimization. I mean, everyone's heard the term. Everyone's SEO. I've done some form of this forever. I probably wouldn't be talking to you without some understanding of a search engine, right? Where do we stand today? And just talk about it in the context of your framework, SEO.
Sure. So, SEO, search engine optimization, just to put a definition on it, it's just trying to rank highly within search engines. And it's a primary way, a lot of people get traction, getting traffic from search engines that way. And big startups have been built on that. So we mentioned Yelp, for example. Yelp has grown a lot via that. So has Wikipedia. It's funny that things have not changed that much, honestly, in terms of how you actually rank highly in search engine optimization. It's still about two things. It's about getting links, high quality links from high quality sources, and content, putting out content that people want to link to, honestly. And within those links and content, there are a bunch of strategies and tactics you can do, but essentially that's what it is. Now, to test SEO, there's a non-intuitive way to test it, because the framework is all about testing things. Because one thing we realize is people premature optimize their tests. They'll say if they're going to test Facebook ads, they'll create 40 instead of 4. And so you really want to have an idea of how to cheaply test each channel. We say no more than $1,000, no more than a month's time. SEO is a very challenging one to test because oftentimes you're going to think about creating content and ranking pages. That takes a lot of time. So there's kind of two shortcuts to test it. One is look at your analytics already. You might have created content that's already getting search engine traffic, and you can kind of see what the scale of that is, and then think about expanding from there. And the second is, somewhat counterintuitively, is use search engine marketing paid ads to test what it would be like if you ranked high, because the ads now appear above the links, and it's as if you ranked number 1, and you can see if that traffic is kind of quality.
That's a great tip. I mean, it's a great piece of insight for anybody out there that's just thinking from a business perspective. I mean, even if they perhaps did not read your book, that particular insight really just, anyone with a pulse just strikes you as, that's a very clever way to start to think about how to test.
Yeah, I mean, testing, in each of these steps in the framework, so brainstorm, testing, focusing, we see people kind of stray in kind of non-intuitive ways. And in the testing one in particular, people have two problems with it. One is they put too much time and money into it, so that's going over the month or $1,000 limit. The second is once they find something that's working, they keep the old tests around. And so, like, say they ran a test on a trade show and PR and Facebook marketing, and Facebook marketing is really successful, or more successful than the other two. If you have a good business and you did the brainstorming right, your other two ideas were probably not bad. So the trade show and the PR, they got some traction out of that. And what people end up doing is they don't throw away the trade show and the PR focus to just focus on Facebook. Then that has two problems. One is you already proved that Facebook marketing was more successful, so time spent on anything else marketing-wise is taken away from that most successful thing. And the second piece, which is arguably worse, is to really dig into your core channel, in this case Facebook marketing, you have to become an expert at it and figure out those underutilized cutting-edge tactics. And that is like a full-time marketing endeavor. And so any time wasted on other channels won't get you there.
Let me bring up one more of the 19. As I mentioned, we're going to talk about 2 today, but there's 19. Email marketing. It's something that I've been doing forever. I'm sure many people out there, maybe they're new to it, they're old to it, but in many ways, to me, it feels like it hasn't changed. It's still just a fantastic way to reach people that want to hear you. They want to hear your content. You give them a way to opt in and opt out at their leisure. It's a fantastic way, and has been for as long as I can remember, to reach people.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. It kind of fell out of favor when some of these, more sexy marketing channels, for lack of a better word, came on board, but it never really lost its effectiveness. And there's kind of two key insights to email that we highlight a lot. One is it's a personal channel. So emails, coming in right by your emails from friends and family. And as a result, like, people think about it in a personal context. And so the more personal you make the emails, the better. And I think some people lose this where they make their emails too flashy and too kind of corporate-y. You actually want to do the opposite and make it more personal. as an extension of that, the other kind of insight is, you don't have to send the same email to everybody. The best email campaigns are very personalized in the sense that they're related to particular actions or cohorts in your business. So that person added something to their shopping cart and didn't complete the purchase, so you send them something just about that. Or you realize they clicked on a link in your last email, so you put them in another cohort to send them this other email. And so that's kind of the trick, is sending people very specific emails tailored to them and then making them very personal.
Talk about this path, and you talk about this in your work, but talk about the path to reach the traction goal in the fewest number of steps.
I'm sure you're familiar with this, and a lot of people are, but when you're running a business, like, you have 1,000 things that nagging at you all the time. Like, you're getting letters from the government that you didn't do something right.
Hold on. I'm not getting any letters from the government for a long time. It's been at least 15 years since I've got a letter from the government. Now, you've just fessed up to something that I'm not sure what you're getting letters from the government about. Continue. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, you late penalty on something or another.
Nice catch. Okay, continue.
Yeah, exactly. So in any case, you have things coming at you in 1,000 directions. What do you focus on? And I think that is a key problem that people mess up. Is they 6 months later, they realize they haven't made a lot of progress. They think back and they're like, where did I spend all my time? So another framework we have in the book, which I've used at DuckDuckGo for our whole team, is called critical path. The idea is quite simple, is you stay on your critical path. And your critical path is, what are the absolutely things I have to do to reach my traction goal? So you've specified what your goal is. For most people, when they start, it's like, how much traction I need to raise money or be profitably sustainable, something like that. That's a hard number. You figure out what you need to do to hit that goal, and you do nothing else. If it's not on that path to that goal, then just don't do it. Just put it off. That's the long and the short of it. But it's so hard to do.
I have one kind of side question, since you have a lot of insight and a lot of perspective on these many subjects. So I launched this podcast in early 2012, and now approaching 400 episodes and many million listens and all that kind of stuff. How do you see podcasts today? Every time I log into iTunes, I see more and more, and you can just tell they're not going to make it. It's almost like it's become the new blog. Everyone is launching a podcast, but I think very few people are thinking about how difficult it is to produce regular quality content.
It's a good analogy. Blogs had a similar kind of fad moment, right? Where everyone started a blog, and then then they all faded away, except for the people who were kind of serious about it, like you. And in the book, we have a chapter on content marketing, and we basically say that it's like, it's very hard to build an audience, but once you build it, and so few people are willing to put in that time and effort, it is very valuable and can be the thing that gets you traction. So I think you're right about podcasts. Everyone's starting them. Once they do 10 episodes, most of the people are going to give up when they realize that they didn't actually want to start a podcast, or it's not working for them and it's so much work. In terms of the actual medium, I love it. I mean, I listen to podcasts all the time. It's one of the primary ways I like receiving information. And so I think the medium itself is going to persist for a long time, has a great place, but the fatted nature of it will come and go.
Yeah, there's many podcasts that I've seen in my particular space where, as you say, there's maybe like 10 episodes, maybe even 20 episodes, and then the regularity starts to die off. Perhaps the whole podcast just starts to die off, and there's like a graveyard of podcasts on iTunes if anyone looks closely.
Oh my goodness! So related to this, podcasts or our main channel strategy this time, right? So I went and researched all the podcasts and looked at all the ones we looked at last year. Literally half the ones we went on last year are dead. As a straightforward example. I mean, it was amazing. I had to look at, it's funny because, you go onto iTunes and you see what the latest episodes are, you want to listen to them. And I got to looking, the first thing I started looking at was whether it said 2014 or 2015, because it's about a year ago, and so a lot of the ones that died around that time, and so you would see August 2014. It was just funny.
I agree with you, though. It's a fantastic medium because producing quality video is an undertaking. I mean, it is, you've got to be, I mean, right now, I don't want to really tell you what I'm wearing. Do I have clothes on? Yes, I have clothes on, but I'm not, but the point being is that, you can't do that with video. With video, it's makeup, it's hair, it's lights, it's camera, it's everything. With a podcast, you need some good sound, but otherwise you can get in and you can kind of shake the trees and pull off a quality effort. And that's a really fabulous innovation that we've seen in the quote internet here now in the last few years.
We should thank you for sticking with it, because like the podcasts that are in their hundreds of episodes, they get so much better over time, and they figure out what their real voice is, what their value proposition is, and those podcasts are the best.
Well, it's true. When I started off, I was only talking to traders, and then I think the real interview that kind of opened up my podcast to other guests was interviewing Daniel Kahneman. And once he came on, it was like, then you'd ask other people and you'd say, hey, Daniel Kahneman appeared. And I think they literally felt stupid if they said no.
Yeah, that's a good strategy you hit up on there.
Well, it's very similar to you getting DuckDuckGo onto Apple. It's very kind of similar. You're creating a leverage point where people just say, well, I don't want to be on the outside. I want to be part of the team. Exactly.
I love leverage. Leverage is one of my favorite words.
Yeah. Hey, where can we send people? The book is, what's the official it's out. You've already had one edition out, but the new edition is out exactly when?
October 6th.
Okay.
It is at tractionbook.com. You can obviously find it on Amazon, but it's at other retailers as well.
Thanks for coming on today. I appreciate the insights. I'm sure other people will appreciate as well.
It's my pleasure. It's been fun.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.